What if I told you the difference between a great day of winter fishing and getting completely skunked comes down to just a few inches of fishing line per minute? It sounds crazy, right? We've all been there. The air is cold, the water is clear, and you know the fish are down there, but you can't buy a bite. You try different lures, different colors, different spots, nothing works. The truth is, the problem probably isn't what you're throwing, but how you're moving it. Today, we're diving deep into the single biggest mistake anglers make in cold water, using the wrong retrieve speed for half-frozen, lethargic fish. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand why that lure you're pulling is practically invisible to them. So, let me ask you this right now, and be honest in the comments. Do you truly believe you're fishing slow enough? For generations, the old-timers have given us the same advice for cold water. You just got to slow down. And they're not wrong, but that advice is dangerously incomplete. It's like telling a chef to just add salt. How much? When? What kind? Slowing down has become this generic phrase we all nod our heads to, but few of us actually execute it correctly. We're creatures of habit. For 8 months out of the year, fishing is about reaction, speed, and covering water. We burn spinnerbaits, we rip lipless cranks, we walk a topwater frog at a good clip. Our brains and our hands are programmed for that tempo. Then winter hits, the water temperature plummets, and we're supposed to just flip a switch. It's not that easy. The urge to reel, to feel the lure working, to move on to the next cast is powerful. That internal clock is our worst enemy, and it's the reason so many of us fail to connect with fish that are right in front of our faces. First, let's get inside the mind of a cold water fish. Or more accurately, let's get inside its body. Fish are cold-blooded, which means their body temperature and their metabolism are directly tied to the water around them. When the water drops into the 40s or even the high 30s, a base's metabolism slows to a crawl. It's not actively hunting for food like it does in the summer. It's conserving every ounce of energy it has, just trying to survive until the spring thaw. Think of it like a grizzly bear in hibernation, except it's underwater. It's not dead, it's not asleep, but it is in a state of extreme lethargy. Its movements are minimal and deliberate. Its world shrinks. It's not going to waste precious energy chasing down a meal that's moving even moderately fast. That's a bad business decision for a creature running on fumes. The fish isn't being picky, it's being efficient. And our retrieve needs to respect that biological reality. We aren't trying to trigger a reaction, we're trying to present an opportunity that's too easy to pass up. So what does this metabolic slowdown mean for its feeding habits? It means the strike zone of a winter bass shrinks dramatically. In the summer, a hungry bass might see a crankbait 10 feet away and rocket over to smash it. It has the energy and the motivation. In the winter, that same bass might not even react to a lure that passes more than a foot from its face. Its world is small, its focus is narrow. It's looking for the easiest possible meal, a dying shad, a slow-moving crawfish, something that requires almost zero effort to inhale. When your lure comes zipping past, even at a speed you think is slow, it might as well be a race car. The fish calculates the energy required to intercept it versus the caloric reward, and the math just doesn't add up. It decides in that cold-blooded brain, nope, not worth it. And it lets your lure go right on by. This is happening on 99 out of 100 casts for most winter anglers. They're fishing in a different dimension than the fish are living in. Now let's turn the camera back on us, the angler. The biggest hurdle isn't the fish, it's our own impatience. We're standing on the bank or in a boat, we're cold, and we want something to happen. The natural human tendency is to speed up, to make something happen. We think, if I cover more water, I'll eventually run into a fish that wants to eat. This is the power fishing mindset, and in winter, it is a recipe for absolute failure. You have to completely reprogram your brain. The goal is no longer to cover water, the goal is to thoroughly, painstakingly dissect a tiny piece of water. A single cast with a jerkbait might need to last 2 or 3 minutes. A jig might need to sit perfectly still on the bottom for 20 or 30 seconds at a time. This feels unnatural, it feels boring, it feels like you're doing nothing, but from the fish's perspective, nothing is exactly what looks natural. That long, long pause is when your lure imitates a stunned or dying baitfish, the exact meal a lethargic base is waiting for. Let's define what painfully slow actually looks like in practice. It's slower than you think, slower than that, even slower. For a reel, it's not about a slow, steady crank. It's often about not cranking at all. Let's imagine you're fishing a jig. You cast it out and let it sink to the bottom on a slack line. Once it's there, you don't immediately start hopping it. You let it sit for 10 long seconds. Then you slowly reel up your slack, and using only your rod tip, you gently drag the jig about 6 inches across the bottom. And then you stop. You let it sit again. Another 10, 15, even 20 seconds. You are moving the lure with your rod, not your reel. The reel is only there to take up the slack you create. This method keeps your lure in that tiny strike zone for an eternity. It gives that sluggish base all the time in the world to see it, approach it, and decide to eat it. It's a game of inches and seconds, not feet and minutes. This brings us to a critical technique, the dead stick. It's exactly what it sounds like. You cast your lure out, and you let it do nothing. This is most effective with suspending jerkbaits or floating and diving crankbaits, but it can even work with soft plastics. You cast a jerkbait, you give it 1 or 2 small twitches to get it down to its running depth, and then you stop. You let it hang there perfectly still. In the water column, you count it out, 1,000, 2, 1,000, all the way up to 20 or 30, 1,000. The lure is just suspended, quivering slightly in the current. To a lethargic base watching from below, this is the ultimate easy meal, a bait fish that is stunned, dying, and unable to escape. It's the equivalent of a free cheeseburger just floating in front of its face. The vast majority of your winter jerkbait bites will come during this impossibly long pause. The twitch is just to get its attention. The pause is what gets the bite. Let's apply this slow-down principle to different lure categories. We already talked about jigs and jerkbaits. What about a crankbait? Most people think of crankbaits as tools for covering water. In winter, you need to use a model that either suspends or has a very slow float. You cast it out, crank it down until it hits the bottom or its maximum depth, and then you stop. If it's a suspending model, you just let it sit there for a long pause, just like the jerkbait. If it's a slow-floating model, you pause and let it rise just a few inches, then you slowly crank it back down. The key is the stop-and-go motion. Crank, pause, crank, pause. The pause needs to be significantly longer than the crank. You're not burning it through the strike zone. You are inching it along, presenting it as a vulnerable, struggling creature. It's a complete reversal of how you'd fish that same lure in June. Even something like a swim bait needs a radical speed adjustment. In summer, you're probably burning a paddle-tail swim bait just under the surface or at a steady pace through the mid-depths. In winter, you need to switch to a lighter jig head than you normally would, something that lets the swim bait fall very slowly. You cast it out, let it pendulum down to the bottom, and then you employ a slow roll. This means turning the reel handle just fast enough to make the paddle tail kick. We are talking about the slowest possible rotation of the handle you can manage while still feeling the faint thump, thump, thump of the tail. It should feel like the lure is barely moving, just crawling along the bottom. This mimics a very slow, cold baitfish or a crawfish. Any faster, and you're moving out of that lethargic base's feeding window. It's a finesse technique disguised as a power fishing lure. Your equipment plays a huge role in your ability to fish slowly and effectively. A high-speed baitcasting reel with a 7.3-to-1 gear ratio is great for picking up slack in the summer, but it can be a liability in the winter. It makes it too easy to reel too fast. A slower reel, something in the 5.4-to-1 range, can be a huge asset. Each turn of the handle picks up less line, forcing you into a more methodical pace. It acts as a governor on your impatience. Similarly, your fishing rod needs to be sensitive. You're not going to get those bone-jarring, rod-ripping strikes of summer. A winter bite can be incredibly subtle. A high modulus graphite rod will transmit those tiny ticks and pressures that you would completely miss with a less sensitive rod. You need to feel everything your line is doing. Let's talk more about that bite. In winter, you have to forget what a bite is supposed to feel like. You are not waiting for a thump or a tick. More often than not, a cold water bite feels like nothing at all. You'll be slowly dragging your jig, and suddenly it just feels different. It might feel a little mushy, like you've dragged it into a clump of weeds, or the line might just feel heavy, with no distinct tap. Sometimes the only indication you get is your line swimming off to the side ever so slightly. This is why line watching is absolutely critical. You need to be a hawk, watching where your line enters the water. Any unnatural movement, a little jump, a twitch, or a slow sideways drift is your signal to set the hook. High visibility braided line with a fluorocarbon leader can be a massive help here. You can see the bite before you ever feel it. The mental game is half the battle. You have to force yourself to slow down and trust the process. It helps to have a system. For example, when you're pausing a jerkbait, actually count in your head 1 1,000, 2 1,000. Make it a rule. You will not move the lure until you hit a count of 20. This kind of disciplined approach overrides your impatient instincts. Another mental trick is to focus on a very small area. Pick a single dock piling, a single lay-down tree, or a small rock pile and decide you are going to make 10 casts to it, each one with a different angle and a painfully slow retrieve. This forces you to abandon the run-and-gun mentality and adopt the patient, methodical mindset of a true winter angler. You have to believe that the fish are there and that your slow presentation is the only way to coax them into biting. Let's consider the wind. Wind is often seen as a negative, but in cold water fishing, it can be your best friend if you use it correctly. A slight breeze will create a little bit of ripple on the surface, which can help disguise your presence. More importantly, it puts a bow in your line. This bow can act as a natural spring, imparting a very subtle, natural movement to your lure without you doing anything at all. For dead sticking a jerkbait or a wacky rigged Senko, this is pure gold. The wind gently rocks the lure back and forth, keeping it alive during those long pauses. The key is to position your boat or yourself on the bank so the wind is blowing from the side, creating that perfect bow. Don't fight the wind. Let it help you maintain that ultra-slow, natural presentation. It's like having a machine do the most delicate part of the work for you. Water clarity is another huge factor that dictates your retrieve speed. In very clear water, which is common in winter, fish can see your lure from a long way off. This might sound like a good thing, but it can also give them more time to scrutinize it and decide it's fake. In this situation, your pauses need to be even longer and your movements even more subtle. The fish is watching, studying. You have to convince it your lure is real. Conversely, in stained or murky water, you might need to slow down even more, but with a slightly different goal. Here, the fish is relying more on its lateral line to detect vibration. A lure that is barely moving, just pushing a tiny bit of water, can be easier for them to locate than something that zips by too quickly. You have to give them time to home in on the subtle signal your lure is sending out in the dirty water. Let's debunk a common myth, the idea that you need to use smaller baits in the winter. While finesse presentations certainly have their place, sometimes the opposite is true. Remember, that fish is trying to get the biggest caloric bang for its buck. A larger, slower-moving meal can be more appealing than a tiny snack that's still not worth the energy to chase. A big jig, a full-size suspending jerkbait, or a substantial swimbait, all presented with that same painstaking, ultra-slow retrieve, can trigger bites from the biggest, most lethargic fish in the lake. The key is not the size of the meal, but the speed of its presentation. Don't be afraid to throw a substantial lure, as long as you have the discipline to move it at a snail's pace. It's about offering an easy, high-value target. Let's walk through a complete cast-to-catch scenario. Imagine you're standing on a rocky point that drops off into deeper water. You have a suspending jerkbait tied on. You make a long cast past your target. First, you let the lure sit on the surface until the ripples fade away. Then, you give it 2 sharp downward snaps of the rod tip. Not twitches, but snaps. This gets the bait down to its maximum depth. And now the hard part begins. You start counting. You let it sit for a full 15 seconds. Your line is semi-slack. After 15 seconds, you give the rod tip one very gentle pull or twitch, just enough to make the lure dart forward about 6 inches and then stop. And you pause again, another 15 or 20 seconds. During this pause, you are glued to your line where it enters the water. Suddenly, you see the line just barely twitch. It's not a pull, just a tiny jump. That's the bite. You reel down fast to pick up the slack and sweep the rod to the side. Fish on. Now let's try that same spot with a half-ounce football jig. You cast to the same area. You watch your line intently as the jig falls. You'll see the line go slack when it hits the bottom. Once it's down, do nothing. Let it sit there. The skirt will be pulsing subtly in the current. After 10 seconds, you slowly raise your rod tip from the 3 o'clock position to the 2 o'clock position. This drags the jig a few inches across the rocks. Then you lower your rod tip back down to 3 o'clock, giving the line slack again, and you wait. You repeat this process. Drag, pause, drag, pause. On one of the drags, it suddenly feels like the jig is snagged on a wet sponge. It just feels heavy and mushy. There's no tap, no thump. That is the fish. It has simply inhaled the jig and is sitting there with it. You reel up the slack and set the hook hard. That's the classic cold water jig bite, and 90% of anglers miss it because they're expecting a summer-style thump. One of the subtle enemies of the slow retrieve is line memory and slack. When you're fishing with long pauses, your line can develop slack. If you're using fluorocarbon line, which is dense and sinks, this is less of an issue. But with monofilament or even braid, a big bow can form in the line. This cushion of slack can kill your ability to detect those subtle bites and can ruin your hook set. This is why it's so important to not just pause, but to manage your line during the pause. After you move the lure, you should slowly reel just enough to get the line taut again, but not enough to move the lure. You want to stay in contact. It's a delicate balance. You need enough slack for the lure to look natural, but not so much that you lose all feeling and control. This is an advanced skill that separates the great winter fishermen from the good ones. Think about the sounds or lack thereof. In summer, we often rely on sound, the plop of a topwater, the rattle of a crankbait. In the dead of winter, silence is your ally. You want your lure to enter the water with as little disturbance as possible. A quiet, stealthy approach is key. This also applies to the lure itself. While a rattling jerkbait can sometimes call fish in, often a completely silent suspending model is more effective. The fish are already on edge and conserving energy. A loud, intrusive sound can be unnatural and spook them. The goal is to present something that seamlessly fits into their quiet, slow-moving underwater world. You want to be a whisper, not a shout. This mindset extends to everything you do, your footsteps on the bank, closing a tackle box lid. It all matters when the world is this still. We need to talk about the yo-yo technique with lures like blade baits or lipless crankbaits. This can be a killer tactic, but again, speed is everything. You cast the lure out and let it sink to the bottom. Then you use your rod tip to lift it off the bottom, maybe 1 or 2 feet, just enough so you can feel it vibrate. Then you immediately drop the rod tip and let the lure fall back to the bottom on a semi-slack line. The vast majority of your bites, I'm talking 95%, will come as the lure is falling. The bite will often just be that subtle tick or the mushy weight when you go to lift it again. The key is the speed of the lift. It shouldn't be a violent rip. It should be a smooth, deliberate pull. And the pause on the bottom is crucial. Let it sit for a few seconds before you lift it again. It's a vertical presentation, even on a long cast. Let's bring this back to the core concept of energy exchange. Fishing is a transaction. You are presenting an offer and the fish decides whether to accept it. In summer, a fish is a big spender. It has energy to burn and will gladly pay a high price, a long chase, for a meal. In winter, that same fish is a frugal miser. It is pinching every last calorie. It will only accept an offer if the price is virtually zero. Your lure has to be right in its face, moving so slowly that it requires almost no effort to acquire. When you move your lure too fast, you are, in economic terms, overpricing your offer. The fish looks at it, says too expensive, and waits for a better deal to come along. Your job as a winter angler is to become the ultimate bargain hunter's dream, offering a 5-star meal for the price of a single fin kick. Finally, you have to build trust in this technique. It's easy to listen to this and nod along, but it's much harder to execute for 5 straight hours on a cold, fruitless day. The first time you commit to this, you will be fighting every instinct in your body. Your brain will be screaming at you to just make another cast or speed it up a little. You have to ignore that voice. Stay disciplined. The first time you get a bite on a 30-second pause, a light bulb will go on. You will finally truly understand. It's a moment of clarity. From that point on, you won't be forcing yourself to fish slow. You'll be doing it because you know it's the only way. You'll develop a new kind of patience, a new rhythm, and you'll start catching fish when everyone else is just getting cold. That one bite will change your entire approach to cold water fishing forever. So, let's bring it all home. We've talked about the fish's metabolism, the angler's impatience, and the nitty-gritty details of lure speed. If there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that fishing slow isn't just a vague piece of advice. It is a precise, disciplined science. The real aha moment, the big turning point, is realizing that your retrieve speed has to match the fish's reality, not your own. We are warm-blooded, impatient creatures. They are cold-blooded, energy-hoarding survivors. We cannot impose our pace on their world and expect success. Learning to slow down, to truly dead-stick a lure, to watch your line like a hawk for the faintest sign of life. This is what transforms you from someone who occasionally gets lucky in the winter to someone who can consistently catch fish in the toughest conditions. It will fundamentally change your fishing. Thank you so much for watching. If this helped you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that goes beyond the basics. Now, I want to hear from you. What is the longest you have ever forced yourself to pause a lure before moving it? Let's see who has the most patience in the comments below.